Bunker Charlie, the Suburbs, the Oil Rig, the Pump Jack. Do you remember all these locations? Locations that were once promised by the devs, but now have become forgotten, relics of the past, promises that were never fulfilled. In this video, we are going to dive into the past, discussing these long forgotten locations and why they were never released. Only 7% of my subscribers have activated the bell. You are missing out on my newest videos, so please consider subscribing and activating the notification bell to receive my newest uploads in your inbox. I will really appreciate your support. Enjoy the video. Bunker Charlie is probably the most popular location out of this list. It has been in the game from the very beginning, intriguing players. Every new player asks, when can I access Bunker Charlie? However, they become very disappointed when they hear that the location is inaccessible. Bunker Charlie is the third bunker of last day on Earth, located in the middle of the ocean to the south of the base. It is in a very small island and pretty close to the shore. However, this island doesn't seem to be accessible. There is no helipad for a helicopter and no docking bay for a motorboat. However, even though these are not displayed on the map, we can assume that since it is a military bunker, they should have a docking bay for ships and boats. The interesting part is that when you click on the transport required button, it takes you to the crafting recipe of the helicopter. So clearly, developers were intending that Bunker Charlie would be accessible using a helicopter. And what about the helicopter? Well, it also has been in the game for a long time, probably as long as Bunker Charlie. The difference is that the helicopter has been even teased by developers on social media, unlike Bunker Charlie, that was never mentioned anywhere by the devs. In one tweet by the official LDOE account, we can read, "Combat helicopters that used to spread terror and death on battlefields are rusting and turning into piles of metal scrap. Will survivors manage to get those birds up and running to use them to their own advantage?" Along with this image of a helicopter. This tweet was all the way back in 2019, and from the looks of things, the devs had already some plans for the helicopter and maybe even Bunker Charlie, because at this point, we know for sure that Bunker Charlie and the helicopter are very tight together. However, back in 2024, there were a couple of tweets discussing future plans for Last Day on Earth, and in one of the tweets, the devs confirmed that they are not going to introduce the helicopter and tungsten. Again, no mention of Bunker Charlie, but it is clear that the devs were not going to release Bunker Charlie as well. But why Bunker Charlie, the helicopter, and tungsten were never released? These features are basically the most anticipated features in Last Day on Earth. To this day, players are still asking when tungsten is going to be released. These features will generate so much hype for the game, but yet somehow Kiefer doesn't want to introduce them. Why? I think the answer is simple. Kiefer was not anticipating the massive hype these features would generate. They did not predict that players would be asking for these features day and night. And for me, I believe that the devs must have put these features in the game thinking that they might introduce them at some point, but it is not urgent. However, as time went by, plans changed. They were focusing on other parts of the game, Bunker Bravo and ATV, the port update, the whole era of settlements, the transport hub, and so on. And also because players had so much expectations about Bunker Charlie that the devs knew they had to deliver on these features. They had some sort of pressure to release Bunker Charlie and the helicopter. However, at some point, they did not want to deal with the pressure anymore, and they simply decided to scrap the ideas and move on to the other parts of the game. I think that we can confidently say that Bunker Charlie is never going to be released. It is now a relic of the past, a forgotten feature that we will talk about every now and then in the future. The Oil Rig is another forgotten location that has been visible in the global map from the very beginning. Although it was not as much popular as Bunker Charlie, the Oil Rig was also highly anticipated by players. Just like Bunker Charlie, the Oil Rig is also located in the middle of the ocean, north of the base, in the island region. Again, when you click on the transport required button, it takes you to the helicopter recipe. At this point, we can understand that the helicopter is the centerpiece of many features in Last Day on Earth. It is connected to Bunker Charlie, tungsten, and now even the Oil Rig. Which makes perfect sense, since there is a visible helipad in the Oil Rig. However, oil rigs can also be accessed using motorboats, since they usually have a small docking bay in the bottom part of the area. So clearly, the oil rig was part of the development plans from the early days. They released the ATV back in 2019, and with the helicopter, Bunker Charlie and the oil rig, the developers were already preparing for the next logical step in terms of progression in Last Day on Earth. However, the oil rig has never received any attention from developers. It has been put in the island region a long time ago, and then they completely forgot about it. Not a single tweet or Facebook post about the oil rig, nothing. When the island region was announced, there was some hope, because the oil rig was the perfect addition for the island region. It is already in the game, so no need to create new designs, and it has been anticipated by players for a long time, so there is already a massive hype around it. More players would be interested in playing the game if they saw that the oil rig was introduced. Unfortunately, it was not the case. The oil rig was not part of the island region update. Instead, they completely overhauled the region, changing the global map and introducing new locations, new features, and so on. The oil rig was not included at all. It was probably the only chance we had to see the oil rig finally added into Last Day on Earth. As I said, it makes perfect sense to have the oil rig as a location in the island region. It could have been a hard location to clear, but with high tier loot. And as I said, oil rigs can be accessed using a boat, and because it is an oil rig with a helipad, we can maybe assume that it would have a broken down helicopter in the top part of the area. And then the broken down helicopter would be like the acid bath in Bunker Alpha. After clearing the oil rig, players would be able to get their hands on the schematic of the broken down helicopter, which would unlock the next part of the progression in the game, building the helicopter, going to Bunker Charlie, and farming tungsten. Of course, these are just ideas that I have. In reality, as I said, Kefir has never talked about the oil rig before, so don't get your hopes up. These are simple theories of what the oil rig could have been. The Suburbs is also a very old location in Last Day on Earth, just like Bunker Charlie and the oil rig. However, the difference is that the Suburbs were actually teased by developers on social media. In a tweet from 2017, we can read the following. As you know, our team set many goals to complete. New locations, holiday events, and many other things you haven't heard about. But we've already mentioned city locations, and even promised to show you 3D models of houses of a suburb. Here it is. Along with this picture, showcasing the first design of the location, talking about the concept of city locations and suburbs. And this was the last time we heard about the suburbs. Since the developers did not mention the location again, it seems that they forgot about its existence. However, it is still appearing in the global map. But unlike the previous locations, the suburbs are not immediately visible in the global map. The player has to first calibrate the watchtower located in the swamp region. The amplifier requires a couple of resources like rubber, wrenches, bolts. However, settlement resources are also required, which makes finalizing this amplifier a bit more difficult. So, once you have activated the amplifier, the global map will expand into the northern region, revealing the suburbs. It is located east of the northern region, and the location seems to be completely covered in snow. The suburbs description reads, "What's there behind the collapsed bridge? Why is the radio show getting interrupted by the distress signals? More questions than answers. This place beckons and scares at the same time." There is the mention of a collapsed bridge, which we can see visible in the global map. This means that we will have to repair this bridge in order to access the suburbs. However, unlike Bunker Charlie, where there was a transport required button, here it is just saying available soon. There is no mention of a specific vehicle that we would need to travel to the suburbs. The only requirements seems to be to repair the bridge. It has been a while now since the suburbs have been available soon. When is it soon? Maybe tomorrow, maybe next month, maybe in the swamp region. We have no idea. Ever since the tweet I mentioned where the devs were teasing the concept of city locations and suburbs, they have stayed silent about it completely. However, when Kefir announced the northern region, we were expecting that the suburbs would be a part of the update. It is located in the northern region, and it is clearly covered in snow. So it would make perfect sense that the suburbs would be a part of the northern region, but it wasn't the case. Just like the Oleric and the island region, the suburbs were completely left out from the northern region update. The reason why the suburbs is not in the game yet is pretty simple. It is too complicated for the devs to add, because in the tweet I showed, they were talking about city locations, which means massive areas with multiple points of interest, just like the recent Uncharted territories. Because of that, Kefir decided to not include the suburbs in the northern region. But I have one theory that might explain why Kefir decided to do that. Maybe they were not sure if the concept of a city location would work properly in Last on Earth. This is why they first released the scouting event, to test this concept of massive locations with multiple points of interest, to see if players would like it, but most importantly, to see if the game could handle a massive location in terms of performance. And I think the results are mostly positive, because the majority of players enjoyed the event, and some players were experiencing lag. However, it seems that everything worked pretty fine for the most part. So who knows, maybe the suburbs will be available soon this time. Maybe they are closer to be released than ever. The Pump Jack is yet another location that was introduced in the early days of Last on Earth. However, unlike the other locations, the Pump Jack actually went through a couple of changes. As we know today, the Pump Jack is located in the multiplayer side of the game, beyond the Sector 7 wall. However, before that, the Pump Jack was located in the Wastelands. It was located east of the base, right next to this river, where the swamp region is right now. When you interact with the Pump Jack, of course it says access denied, with the message you need to join a clan to enter this place. But then after 1.8, the Pump Jack was relocated beyond the Sector 7 wall, becoming a part of the multiplayer side of the game. The description of the Pump Jack says the following: the main source of black gold in this sector. However, the location is still inaccessible. This time it says available only during clan wars. So clearly the Pump Jack is a location meant for multiplayer, specifically clan wars. However, even after the release of Sector 7 and then the crater, the Pump Jack did not make an appearance. It is still inaccessible in the crater, saying the same message, available only during clan wars. For a long time, this was the only information we had about the Pump Jack and clan wars, until recently, where the devs announced in a blog post that they wanted to experiment with the idea of clans. This item is marked with an asterisk because we want to experiment with the clan functionality. We will try to design a co-op for special locations. We would like to introduce an inter-clan competition feature so that everyone in the Wastelands knows whose faction is the strongest and most influential, featuring rewards, of course. And then they shared another post on Discord asking the community to share ideas and suggestions about clans. So clearly, Kefir is now trying to work again on the concept of clans in Last on Earth. It is pretty much confirmed at this point that clans are going to be part of Last on Earth. However, the question is, will the update for clans include the Pump Jack? The most obvious answer would be yes, of course. The Pump Jack has been teased by the devs time and time again as a location for clan wars. However, remember that the Suburbs and the Oil Rig were not part of the regional updates, so it is completely possible that the devs would introduce a whole bunch of new locations when the Clan Wars update comes out. Finally, the most mysterious location in this list, Bunker Zulu. We know very little information about this location. It is not even visible in the global map, and the developers have never officially talked about Bunker Zulu. The only clue we have about this mysterious bunker is the CAC card. Unlike Bunker Alpha CAC card, the Zulu card does not serve any purpose. There is no bunker in the game that can be accessed using the Zulu card. The other difference is that the Zulu card has a completely different design than the other cards, which means that it holds even more value. It's more important. Maybe the Zulu card is reserved to the highest ranks of the military, and Bunker Zulu was one of the most important bunkers of the game. What's even more alarming is that this Zulu card can be usually obtained by defeating some of the hardest bosses in Last on Earth, such as the Big One and the Borealis. So clearly, these bosses were some kind of high rank officers in the military, since they have the Zulu cards in their pockets, which further confirms that Bunker Zulu must be the hardest and most difficult location in the game. Maybe it contains even more dangerous creatures, more dangerous than the big one. However, let's get back to reality for a moment here. Bunker Zulu is probably the location that has the lowest chance of getting released. There is no way that Kefir is thinking about Bunker Zulu right now. Bunker Zulu is basically a tool for Kefir to generate some hype about the game. Players, if they see the Bunker Zulu card, they would be curious and excited, and they might keep playing Lost on Earth, hoping that someday they might enter the mysterious Bunker Zulu. And that's the end of the list. These were the 5 forgotten locations of Last Day on Earth. Will any of these locations ever come out? I don't know. What I know for sure is that if Kefir decides to release any of these locations, the game would finally reach the popularity it always deserved. Thanks for watching and bye bye.